Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Datalore, which is episode 12 of season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the first season episode, Datalore. So Datalore is the episode where the Enterprise D returns to the planet where they found Data. They find a hidden compound of a colony that he used to live in, and he refers to his creators, Dr. Nooney and Soon. And they find another android that looks just like him there, so they bring him back to the Enterprise, reassemble him, and he says that his name's Lore. But Lore, as it turns out, is evil and wants to kill everyone on the Enterprise D. He disables Data and steals his identity, and Wesley is the only one who can figure this out, while the adults and the crew are moronically oblivious to the fact that Data is obviously acting like Lore. So eventually Wesley convinces his mother to help revise Data, and they revive him, and then Data tries to stop Lore, who's trying to kill everyone on the crew by feeding them to a crystalline entity, the same entity that killed all the colonists. And eventually Data gets the better of Lore, beams him into space, and Picard never even apologizes to Wesley. Anyway, so you can probably tell my feelings on this episode through the synopsis I give. Sometimes I make it a bit clearer through the synopsis I give. I sometimes give snarky or sarcastic synopsis. You can kind of tell my feelings on the episode, particularly if I don't care for it. So this episode is a highly regarded episode of Season 1. Many regard this as one of the best episodes of Season 1. The reasons why elude me. To be fair, I used to think highly of this episode when I was a teenager, but here's the thing. This is something I've talked about in other videos many times. I watched Star Trek Next Generation out of order. I started watching it while the 5th season was airing, so I was watching it in reruns. And reruns were showing reruns of Season 4 because Season 4 just came to syndication to reruns. And so they were fascinated with showing Season 4 over and over again. So I saw Season 4 first before I saw any previous seasons. So I was already aware who Lore was through the episode Brothers. In fact, I already knew about the crystalline entity through the 5th season episode Silicon Avatar. When I saw this episode for the first time, I was like, oh, this is the backstory of Lore. And so I was kind of fascinated from that regard. Oh, this is how we meet Lore, and this is how we meet the crystalline entity. It wasn't until later I started, because Lore is actually portrayed very well in the episode Brothers of Season 4. So that was my first introduction, was a good dynamic portrayal of Lore in a good episode, where there was good character interactions between Data and Lore. He seemed like a dynamic character. And so when I saw Datalore, I was like, oh, that's just his backstory. But in actuality, the correct way to look at it is Lore was a two-dimensional, mustache-twirling, evil twin trope brought to life. And in this episode, and then later in the episode Brothers, they kind of saved him and made him a better character. And same thing about the crystalline entity, by the way. Silicon Avatar, amazing portrayal of the crystalline entity. And that's actually one of my favorite episodes of Season 5. But in this episode, it's just a generic bad guy, monster, whatever. And so when I finally got older and I looked at this episode objectively on its own merits, I realized it's not good. And then also you get Data's origins, which I thought was really interesting. But again, that's after I'd already seen Dr. Noonien soon in a much better episode, Brothers, and his backstory was already explained there. And here it's kind of, I don't know, it doesn't really make sense to me that this crew found him just lying there in the cave entries, but they had no idea his colony was there, even though later on there's very clear colonies there. Like, Data has memory of these colonists, so how come they never went back and looked for this colony in the 20-some years? And even then, they should have seen the devastation of the crystalline entity. Why didn't they look into that? They should have realized it was a colony. What about all those people that died, like Dr. Marr's son, and who was just vacationing there, and all the other people that lived in this colony? But anyway, how come they're just finding it for the first time after 23 years? Anyway, in that opening scene where Data's learning to sneeze, kind of dumb. I didn't really care for that. So, apparently, I was just reading about this episode, and the original concept was they would find a female android that would become a love interest for Data. And it was Brent Spiner's idea to, no, let's not do that. Let's do the evil twin trope instead. I just lost a lot of respect for Brent Spiner after learning that. I'm sorry, but that sounds like a much better episode. Now, granted, it could also have been cliche, especially since it was made in season 1, which is not a good season. But I think it would have still been better than this. They actually had an android that was female, and they have a love story with Data. That sounds interesting. It sounds like you could do some character dynamics with that. But instead, they're like, no, let's do a threat episode about Data's evil twin. And he does come off as that, just a generic evil twin who's evil for the sake of it. Now, later, they will explain that he was, or they kind of explain in this episode too, that he was just an earlier version of Data that was sort of malfunctioning and wasn't made correctly, which is why they scrapped him. Why they left his, why they left his body just nice and neat right there, easy to be assembled, instead of like incinerating him. Who knows? I mean, you could argue that Soon was too sentimental about one of his earlier creations, especially since technically he's alive and he didn't want to kill him. I mean, I'll buy that for $1. I mean, I'll accept that explanation, but still, it seems rather convenient that there wasn't like a warning sign. Warning, evil, do not reconstruct. Or something like that. But then again, as I said, the episode needs to happen. So, nothing in that regard. So, and the way that he is evil is really mustache twirly. Particularly after he turns evil and he contacts the crystalline entity, which, by the way, this is totally inconsistent with Silicon Avatar. Now, you could blame Silicon Avatar for that since it came after this episode, but I don't want it because it's a much better episode. But anyway, it's inconsistent because Lore always has to do is talk to the crystalline entity, whereas in Silicon Avatar there was a big deal trying to communicate and they tried to do all those harmonics, and that was actually better. That that a character was portrayed as like a worthwhile character, not just an evil monster as it was in this episode. But anyway, Lore says to Data after he's already unconscious because he's doing his evil villain monologuing, because he's a mustache twirly 2-dimensional villain. Anyway, he says to Data, oh, that the crystalline entity was was so grateful when I reveal the location of the colony. Can you imagine its gratitude when I give it all the lives on the Enterprise? What the fuck does Lore care about his gratitude? What does Lore get out of it? Was a crystalline entity like giving him money or something? Like, is he giving him power? Like, what kind of, why the fuck would he care about this weird snowflake running around space having gratitude towards Lore? What, is he gonna give him like snowflakes? I don't know. Like, what? It doesn't make any sense. He's just being evil for the sake of being evil. And then you get the whole thing of, we get scenes with, you could tell something is off with him, like he was like playing dumb when Geordi and Wesley were showing him how to fly the ship, and Riker like said something, it says some complex equation, and Lore's like, oh yes, and answers it quick until he realizes, or something. And that's supposed to be a cool scene of Riker outsmarting Lore, but I don't know, it just shows him as, again, like obviously evil. And then the worst part of this episode is the fact that after Lore disables Data and pretends to be Data, it is so fucking obvious that it is not Data, that it's Lore, and Wesley is the only one who can figure this out. This is so frustrating, and why I hate this character of Wesley. He doesn't necessarily, he kind of saves the ship in this episode, because without him they would have never defeated Lore, and they all would have been killed by the crystalline entity, which, by the way, they would have fucking deserved it, because they're so dumb and don't even realize that that's clearly not Data. So Data, or Lore pretending to be Data, comes on the ship, and when they see the crystalline entity, he goes, "Beautiful, isn't it?" And nobody fucking notices this. Nobody is like, I don't remember Data acting like this. This sounds more like Lore. Maybe it's Lore. And not only do they not notice that, which they fucking should, when Wesley rightfully points it out, they're just like, shut up, Wesley. Now, there's something I need to bring up, because this has become a classic line, and don't get me wrong, I love the old shut up Wesley as well, because I hate the character of Wesley. But in this particular case, they're all acting like morons, and Wesley's the only smart one, and then when he points out the obvious, they tell him to shut up. Could they portray the crew as any more incompetent? I don't think so. I don't think of any episode where they come off as more idiotic and incompetent than in this one. And, so I mentioned this before. I once saw 2 episodes of Next Generation in the movie theater when they did the Blu-ray celebration, when they released the Blu-ray of Season 1, and I just so happened to be in San Francisco visiting my family at the time. And we went to see it at the movie theater. They showed 2 episodes. They showed Where No One Has Gone Before, and then this episode. Now, I was really looking forward to seeing Where No One Has Gone Before, even though I don't think it's a great episode. So, interesting episode. Really wanted to see it. And, I already paid money to get in, so we thought, well, might as well stick around and watch Datalore as well. So, again, it's telling that they chose Datalore. I mean, it shows how popular this episode is, that out of all the episodes of Season 1, No One Has Gone Before is pretty well liked and pretty well known as one of the better episodes of Season 1, but the fact the other episode they chose, when there's other much better episodes like Arsenal of Freedom, they could have chose that, or Skin of Evil, or Symbiosis, or Conspiracy. Now, Conspiracy may be a bit too gross for that kind of thing, so they want something a bit more family friendly. I get that, and Symbiosis maybe is a bit too talky and drama based, and they want something more fun for, family adding. But why not go with the Arsenal of Freedom? That's clearly way better. But no, they didn't go with that. They went with this episode. And by the time I saw this in the theaters, I was like, made me realize just how not good this episode was. Now, reason why I'm bringing it up, though, is one thing, because it was cool seeing the Next Generation episodes in theater. You got the communal experience and everything like that. People weren't as cosplaying as much as I hoped they would be. I was a bit disappointed about that, but then again, I didn't cosplay, so I have no room to fucking talk, do I? But when we had this scene where Picard tells Data, where he says, "Shut up," or not Data, he says, "Shut up, Wesley." Everyone in the theater cheered. I did appreciate that. And then when Crusher says, "Shut up, Wesley," they all cheered as well. And yeah, as I said, I love the good "Shut up, Wesley," but the problem is he's the only one that's actually noticing the obvious, where the other ones are being highly incompetent. And the fact that he never apologized to Wesley for the fact he's clearly right. Instead, they keep chastising him. They say, "Wesley, you're acting out of character. Oh, you're going to be removed of duty. Wesley, that's not how you talk to an adult." Now, to be fair, the way he brings it up is very childish, and he doesn't bring it up in the best way possible. Like, he interrupts them and goes, "What if that's actually Lore pretending to be Data?" And so the way he does it is kind of disrespectful, and he doesn't go about it the right way. But counterpoint to that, he's 14 years fucking old. He doesn't know any better. He's not a trained officer like these older adults are. So they should be grown up enough to not be like, "Oh, shut up, you stupid teenager. You don't know what it's talking about." When Data is obviously Lore, going around doing shit like, "Oh, beautiful, isn't it?" And they can't, oh my god, it's just so frustrating. It's so annoying. And it's just, it's so bad. And, acting like a two-dimensional villain, just like the crystalline entity. And then Data shows up to stop Lore, and Wesley and Beverly go with him. And when, Data's like, "Oh, I should have let you on the planet," or something like that. And then Lore's response is, "Oh, then why did you give me these two wonderful gifts?" Referring to Wesley and Beverly. And you know what? He's right. Why the fuck did Data bring those two people in, where the only use they can serve is Lore to use them against Data, which is what he does. He shoots Beverly in the arm, which sets fire, and he threatens to kill Wesley, almost defeating Data for it. So why did he bring them in? This seemed like kind of a dumb move, didn't it? But, he does save the day, beam him out into space, which Pac-led ship just so happens to find him, which does seem rather coincidental because space is big. But whatever, that's a Brothers thing, which is a much better episode. So, can't really complain. And then, Picard never apologizes and instead, says Wesley can return to duty. Even though he's just been through a traumatic experience, maybe he should go to sickbay or see a counselor or something, rather than just going straight to duty. But hey, what do I know? Let's take it to the experts like Picard and Riker, people who couldn't even figure out that wasn't fucking Data. Beautiful, isn't it? Oh yeah, that's totally Data. Data, he always says stuff like that. Anyway, I want to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Very much appreciated. It helps the channel to keep going. So we have, let me just bring it up here. Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Managester, Joel Viles, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neil Howes. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Extremely appreciated. Now, before I get into the comments, though, there's something I forgot to mention that I want to bring up. This episode is retconned several times. It's retconned in Brothers because it's shown that Dr. Soon died in this attack, and they're saying, no, he actually escaped. And then it's retconned again in Inheritance when it shows that Dr. Soon actually had another android based off of his wife that was more human at the time. And he took that android with him, just left Data wide open in the cavern, and then left Lore disassembled inside this facility for anyone to sign without even a warning sign saying, warning, do not assemble, evil. So both things are kind of dumb, and I had a lot of issues with Inheritance. That was a totally unnecessary, tacked on episode to Data's backstory, which we didn't need. But Brothers is a good episode, so I don't mind them retconning stuff there. And then there's also Silicon Avatar that kind of retcon that, I don't know. It brought up the fact that Data said that he had the memories of all the colonists, which seems like a really weird thing. And by the way, if he had all their memories, why didn't they go visit this colony before in these 23 years? And why didn't he already know how to find the colony if he had all their memories? Anyway, but they brought it up again in Silicon Avatar and made it a huge plot point, which isn't necessarily a retcon. It is wondering, like, Dr. Marsh should have known exactly where her son was, so why didn't he go looking for him within these 23 years, but whatever. But I was actually used very well. Yeah, as I said, that was a good episode. Alright, so now, let me get into Patron comments that my Patreon supporters left on this episode. So first comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, I never understood why I hear so much praise of Datalore. First, if I can be blunt, Lore is one of the least interesting villains in Trek. Only in Brothers was there any attempt to add depth and respect to sibling rivalry, and even that was limited. Second, I'm tired of what I call the 80s Spielberg trope, where the child is smarter than the adults. By this point in the series, there were reasons other characters, including his mother, Dr. Crusher, should be listening to Wesley rather than giving the line people want to joke about. Many should be listening to Wesley rather than giving rather than giving the line, shut up, Wesley. It wasn't earned, except to demonstrate the brightest and best of the entire Starfleet are imbeciles. The crystalline entity does get interesting, but only due to a later episode. Otherwise, here, it's an alien of the week. It's a monster of the week. Oh, sorry, it's not even an alien of the week. It's a monster of the week. This episode did have potential to tell us about Data's origin, including he himself learning about it, which what I can say wouldn't have been much more interesting than the evil twin trope. Although there are a lot more Soons than Datas, as we seem to now know, with the exception maybe of the original Soon and Data, of course. I've not been impressed with Brent Spiner's portrayal of the other multiple characters, and that includes Lore. This episode does add lore, no pun intended, to the series and to the character of Data, and only for that I wouldn't put this on the skip list. But it's not the most watchable. 2 contractions and ticks out of 10. Yes, pretty much saying a lot of the same things I was saying about, how these characters are a bit more interesting. I think, yeah, Lore, it's a good point to point out that Lore was only good in the episode Brothers, because in Descent, he was a two-dimensional villain as well, and also in his recent reappearance in Picard Season 3. Kind of interesting how Data defeated him, but still coming off as a two-dimensional mustache-twirly villain. Always was. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells. Datalore. I've always hated the evil twin trope, and Lore is no exception. He's able to contact the crystalline entity and destroy the colonists on Omicron Theta. But why? Because he's evil? I'm sorry, but that's not a good enough reason. The crystalline entity is an interesting idea, and it looks fabulous, but mindless evil becomes boring quick. How does Geordi LaForge know what a parking orbit is? Unlike Norman, I would put this on the skip list. 3 Beverly Crushers with the phasered arm out of 10. Interesting. So, next comment is from Ricky, who very bluntly starts out by saying, "This episode sucks. I mean, this is such a crap episode, and I'm tired that we have Wesley Crusher once again saving the ship, and that only he knows that something is going on with Lore. I mean, seriously, he knows everything and anything, that he is the only savior. Also, I can't stand the evil twin trope. It's been done to death so many times, and it was already old by the time this episode came out. The only positives in this episode are the origins of Data and the crystalline entity, which play a huge role in season 5 episode, and of course the famous "Shut Up, Wesley." That's the only saving grace of this episode, but other than that, this episode is garbage. My rating is a 3 out of 10. Well, at least those Patreon supporters that support my channel are not some of the ones that love this episode. That at least is good to hear, because yes, they are pointing out a lot of very valid criticisms, and I don't understand why so many people like this episode. So my rating for Datalore out of 10 is also going to be a 3, very poor. I think its saving grace is the interesting concept of learning about Data's backstory and him confronting that, and him confronting like another being who's just like him. But after that, it just goes completely downhill. It jumps straight into the evil twin trope, and it does a terrible cliche job of it. Lore is a very cliche, two-dimensional, mustache-twirly villain who's flat and uninteresting. The crystalline entity is also, well, as Brandon points out, looks cool. Is also just a generic monster of the week. Not interesting, flat. The characters, the adults, act like imbeciles, and only Wesley is the only one with any intelligence to him whatsoever, which angers me. So, 3 out of 10 for this episode. So that is it for my review of Datalore. So coming up next on my channel, let's see here. So, this Wednesday will be my review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2 as a whole. And on Friday, I'll be back with another TNG review for Angel 1. And then the following Monday, another Next Generation review for 11001001. And then Wednesday, I'm going to be starting my reviews for the Ahsoka series. I am going to the first Star Wars show I will be reviewing weekly. So that's what's coming up on my channel. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Also check out my channel as I cover many other Star Trek videos, as well as many videos on other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.